The hand closed around her arm before she had taken 3 steps past the barracks entrance. Marin Okafor did not flinch. She had felt the presence behind her for the last 40 meters, had tracked the breathing patterns of at least 4 individuals, had noted the deliberate heaviness of boots meant to intimidate. What the fingers gripping her bicep did not know, what the circle of bodies now forming around her could not possibly understand, was that she had disarmed men in absolute darkness using nothing but the sound of their heartbeats. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you have witnessed similar acts of courage where you are from. The fluorescent lights of the Naval Station Great Lakes corridor hummed overhead as a voice spoke from somewhere above her left shoulder. Well, well, well. Looks like we got ourselves a fresh transfer who forgot to check in with the welcome committee. Marin turned slowly, taking inventory without appearing to do so. For males, the one holding her arm stood 6'2", broad shoulders, the kind of handsome that had never been told no. His uniform bore the insignia of a cadet sergeant, and his grip suggested he had never grabbed someone who knew 17 ways to break every finger on his hand. The 3 behind him ranged from nervous to eager, the classic composition of a bully and his enablers. She kept her voice flat and unremarkable. I was told to report to Building 14 for administrative processing. The tall one laughed, and his crew joined in with the synchronized timing of men who had practiced this routine before. He leaned closer, and she caught expensive cologne beneath the standard issue soap. Administrative processing. That is adorable. I am Cadet Sergeant Bryce Kellerman, and around here, all new arrivals process through me first. He squeezed her arm harder, testing for a reaction he would not receive, especially the female ones. Marin had spent 6 years in places where showing fear meant death. She had held position for 11 hours in a Syrian drainage pipe, while enemy combatants walked inches above her head. She had performed battlefield surgery on her own thigh with no anesthesia, while insurgents searched the building she was hiding in. The pressure on her arm registered somewhere below a mild inconvenience. But she was not here to demonstrate capability. She was here to investigate, to observe, to document the culture of abuse that had driven Seaman recruit Thomas Yilmaz to hang himself in a supply closet 6 weeks ago. The classified briefing had included photographs she could not unsee. A 20-year-old boy with his whole life ahead of him, reduced to a body bag because men like the one currently touching her believed their father's ranks made them untouchable. Colonel Vernon Clermonson. She had memorized the file. I understand, she said, letting a slight tremor enter her voice that was entirely manufactured. I do not want any trouble. Bryce Kellerman's smile widened at what he interpreted as submission. See, that is the right attitude. He released her arm and gestured expansively. The boys and I run a tight operation here. New transfers pay their respects, show some appreciation for the guidance we provide during their transition period. His eyes traveled down her body with the laziness of someone who had never faced consequences. And you look like someone who could show a lot of appreciation. One of the cadets behind him snickered. The youngest one, positioned at the back of the formation, looked distinctly uncomfortable but said nothing. Marin noted exits, angles, the weight distribution of each individual, the likely reaction time if she needed to move. 14 years of training ran calculations beneath the surface of a face that showed only uncertainty. What kind of appreciation exactly? Bryce stepped closer, close enough that she could have collapsed his trachea before his brain registered movement. We will start with you carrying my gear to the training facility every morning. 6 a.m. sharp. Then we will see how creative you can get. He reached out and lifted her chin with one finger, a gesture so condescending that 2 of his crew exchanged glances. Don't worry, I will break you in gentle. The youngest cadet at the back cleared his throat. Bryce, maybe we should let her get settled first. She just got here. Bryce did not turn around, but his voice dropped to something cold. Did I ask for your input, Reeves? No, Cadets Sergeant. Then shut your mouth before I shut it for you. Marin filed that interaction away. Dissent in the ranks. Potential witness. She allowed her shoulders to slump slightly, performing the role of a woman who had no options. 6 a.m. I understand. Bryce patted her cheek twice, quick taps that stopped just short of a slap. Good girl. Now get out of my sight before I decide your processing starts tonight. She walked away at exactly the pace a frightened new transfer would walk. Behind her, she heard Bryce say something to his crew that made them laugh, heard the words fresh meat and easy mark. She counted her steps, kept her breathing visible and shallow, maintained the fiction. At the corner of the corridor, she passed a young woman in recruit whites who was pressing herself against the wall, eyes wide, clearly hoping to go unnoticed by the group behind them. The woman could not have been more than 19, with skin the color of dark honey and a name tape that read Becky. Marin paused just long enough to make eye contact. Spoke quietly. Barrack C, 3rd floor. Stay there tonight. The young woman nodded once, quickly, and Marin continued walking. 6 weeks ago, a boy named Thomas had walked these same corridors, had probably pressed himself against these same walls, had probably been grabbed by these same hands, surrounded by these same smiles. And when he could not take it anymore, when the system designed to protect him had failed at every level, he had found the only exit that seemed available. Marin reached Building 14 and pushed through the doors into a waiting area that smelled of floor wax and bureaucracy. She approached the desk where a tired-looking petty officer was processing paperwork. Petty Officer First Class Okafor, she said, reporting for administrative transfer duty. The man looked up, checked his manifest, and frowned. You're not on my list. She slid a sealed envelope across the counter. Master Chief Vasquez should be expecting this. The petty officer examined the envelope, noted the security classification stamps, and his demeanor shifted immediately. Wait here. Marin waited. Through the window behind the desk, she could see the parade grounds where recruits marched in formation, learning the rhythms of military life. Somewhere out there, Bryce Kellerman was returning to his routine, secure in the knowledge that he had just successfully intimidated another target. He had no idea that the woman he had just touched was operating under direct orders from Naval Special Warfare Command. He had no idea that every word he had spoken had been recorded by the device embedded in her collar. And he had no idea that the file documenting his crew's activities, including the events leading to Thomas Yilmaz's death, was about to gain its most important witness. The door behind the desk opened, and a woman in her 50s with command presence etched into every line of her face stepped through. Master Chief Elena Vasquez looked at Marin with the eyes of someone who had seen too much and was tired of what she had seen. Petty Officer Okafor. Her voice was carefully neutral. Welcome to Great Lakes. I understand you are here to help us with a filing project. Yes, Master Chief. Marin held her gaze. I am very thorough when it comes to documentation. Something flickered in Vasquez's expression. Follow me. As Marin walked through the door into the restricted section of the building, she felt the weight of the mission settling onto her shoulders. Bryce Kellerman thought he had just met another victim. What he had actually met was the woman who had earned the call sign Ghost during operations so classified that her own family did not know they existed. The investigation had officially begun, and somewhere in the barracks, she knew, Bryce was already planning what he would do to the quiet new transfer who had shown such promising fear. He would learn soon enough that some prey had teeth. The restricted section of Building 14 contained exactly what Marin had expected. A small office with no windows, a desk covered in personnel files, and a woman who looked like she had been fighting a war that no one else could see. Master Chief Vasquez closed the door and engaged a lock that clicked with more authority than standard Navy hardware. She turned to face Marin with an expression that balanced hope against the exhaustion of repeated disappointment. I requested assistance 4 times through official channels. For times I was told the investigation was ongoing and that I should focus on my administrative duties. Marin remained standing. The room felt tight, not from its dimensions but from the weight of what it contained. Who told you to stop asking questions? Vasquez laughed, but there was no humor in it. Captain Hendricks suggested that my concerns about recruit welfare were admirable, but that I should trust the process. Colonel Kellerman personally assured me that his office was monitoring the situation. She pulled a file from her desk drawer, and set it down with the careful precision of someone handling evidence. Thomas Yilmaz, 20 years old, enlisted because he wanted to serve his country and make his immigrant parents proud. Dead 6 weeks ago because the process failed him. Marin opened the file. The photograph showed a young man with dark eyes and a smile that suggested he still believed the world could be fair. She had seen that smile before in other files attached to other bodies. The idealists always broke the hardest. Tell me what the official investigation concluded. Vasquez sat down heavily. Suicide due to personal issues unrelated to his military service. No evidence of hazing or misconduct. Case closed with condolences sent to his family in Minnesota. And what do you believe happened? The Master Chief met her eyes. I believe Bryce Kellerman and his crew targeted Thomas from day one because he was small and quiet and did not fight back. I believe they subjected him to systematic abuse that escalated over 3 months. I believe Thomas reported the harassment twice through proper channels, and both times his complaints disappeared before reaching anyone who would act on them. And I believe that on the night he died, something happened that pushed him past his breaking point. Marin turned a page in the file. The incident reports were thin, sanitized, scrubbed of any detail that might implicate anyone with connections. What happened that night? I do not know. Vasquez leaned forward. But I know that Thomas was seen entering Barracks D at approximately 2100 hours. Barracks D is Kellerman territory. He was found in the supply closet at 0300. Whatever occurred in those 6 hours, no one is talking. The silence in the room felt heavy with ghosts. Marin had conducted interrogations in locations that would never appear on any map, had extracted confessions from men trained to resist every technique in a manual. She knew how to find truth buried under layers of fear and loyalty. But this was different. This was happening on American soil, in a facility designed to create the next generation of sailors. And the enemy wore the same uniform as the victims. She closed the file. I need access to personnel records for Kellerman and his associates. I need security footage from the night of Thomas' death, whatever has not been conveniently lost. And I need to know who else has been targeted. Vasquez pulled a USB drive from her pocket. Personnel records are on here. The security footage from that night experienced a technical malfunction according to official reports, but I have a contact in IT who recovered partial files before they were overwritten. As for other targets, she hesitated. There is a recruit named Destiny Becky who has been receiving special attention from Kellerman's crew for the past 2 weeks. Marin remembered the frightened young woman in the corridor, the way she had pressed herself against the wall like she was trying to disappear. I met her briefly. Then you understand the urgency. A knock on the door interrupted them. Vasquez held up a hand, waited 3 seconds, then called out, "Enter." The door opened to reveal a young man in cadet whites, the same one who had shown reluctance during Kellerman's corridor performance. His name taped Red Reeves, and up close Marin could see the conflict written across his features. The look of someone caught between loyalty and conscience. Master Chief. His voice cracked slightly. I was told to deliver this requisition form for your signature. Vasquez took the paper with an expression that suggested she knew exactly why he was really here. Thank you, Cadet Reeves. That'll be all. But Reeves did not move. His eyes flickered to Marin, then back to Vasquez. He swallowed hard. Master Chief, I wanted to say. He stopped, started again. There are things happening that are not right. I know there are procedures, and I know I am supposed to go through channels, but the channels do not seem to go anywhere. Marin watched him carefully. The boy was terrified, that much was clear. But beneath the fear was something else, something that looked like decency struggling to survive in hostile territory. Vasquez softened her voice. Cadet Reeves, this is Petty Officer Okafor. She is assisting me with administrative matters. If you have concerns about conduct violations, you can document them through the proper reporting system. Reeves shook his head. The reporting system is broken. Thomas used the reporting system. His face twisted with something between grief and guilt. I should have done more. I saw what was happening to him, and I told myself it was not my business, that he needed to toughen up, that everyone goes through it. He met Marin's eyes directly for the first time. I was wrong. The admission hung in the air between them. Marin had seen this pattern before as well. The witnesses who stayed silent until the weight of their silence became unbearable. The ones who woke up in the night hearing screams they had chosen to ignore. "What did you see?" she asked quietly. Reeves glanced at the closed door behind him. "The night Thomas died. I was on fire watch from 2200 to 0200. I saw him go into Kellerman's room around 21:30. I heard sounds, laughing at first, then something else. Something that sounded like crying, and then like nothing at all. When Thomas came out around midnight, he was not walking right. His eyes were just empty, like whatever was inside him had been removed." "Did you report what you witnessed?" The young man's face crumpled. "I told Petty Officer Garrison the next morning. He said I must have been mistaken, that Kellerman and his friends were studying together that night, and that I should be careful about making accusations against the colonel's son." Vasquez and Marin exchanged a look. The conspiracy of silence was not just cultural. It was systematic, protected from above, maintained through intimidation and the strategic placement of loyal gatekeepers. "Cadet Reeves," Marin said carefully, "would you be willing to provide a formal written statement about what you witnessed?" Fear flashed across his features. "If Kellerman finds out I talked, he will destroy me. His father has connections everywhere. My career would be over before it started." Marin stepped closer, lowered her voice. "Thomas Yilmaz does not have a career anymore. He does not have anything anymore. His parents are sitting in a house in Minnesota right now, wondering why their son is dead and being told it had nothing to do with his service." She let that sink in. "You can walk out of this room and pretend this conversation never happened. You can spend the rest of your career knowing what you know and saying nothing. Or you can help me make sure what happened to Thomas never happens to anyone else." The silence stretched between them. Reeves looked at Vasquez, who nodded almost imperceptibly. He looked at the door, at the escape route that would lead him back to comfortable complicity. Then he looked at Marin, and something shifted in his expression, hardened into resolution. "Tell me what you need me to do." Behind the walls of Building 14, Marin felt the first piece of the puzzle click into place. One witness willing to talk. One crack in the wall of silence that protected Bryce Kellerman and whoever was shielding him from above. It was not enough. Not yet. But it was a start. And somewhere across the base, she knew Bryce Kellerman was waking up to another day of unchallenged power, secure in the belief that his position was untouchable. He had no idea that the foundation was already beginning to crack. The barracks common room fell silent when Marin walked in at 05:45 the next morning. She had chosen her timing deliberately, arriving before Kellerman's 6 a.m. deadline with just enough margin to appear obedient but not eager. The room held perhaps a dozen recruits and cadets in various stages of preparing for the day, and every single one of them stopped what they were doing to watch the new transfer, who had already been marked as Kellerman's latest project. Marin kept her eyes forward and her posture slightly hunched, maintaining the fiction of a woman who knew her place. She found an empty seat near the wall and sat down to wait, letting the whispers wash over her like background noise. "That is her, the one Kellerman grabbed yesterday. I heard she almost cried. Poor thing does not know what she is in for." The gossip network of a military installation moved faster than official communications. By now, everyone on base would know that the quiet new administrative transfer had been selected for special attention. Some would feel sympathy. Most would feel relief that it was not them. None would intervene. Marin used the time to observe. She cataloged faces, noted who associated with whom, identified the subtle hierarchies that existed beneath the official rank structure. 3 cadets near the coffee station wore the same confident swagger as Kellerman's crew, laughing too loud at jokes that were not funny, taking up more space than necessary. Potential associates, or simply admirers hoping to join the inner circle. In the far corner, she spotted Destiny Mbeki sitting alone with a cup of tea she was not drinking. The young woman's eyes were fixed on the door with the vigilance of prey watching for predators. When she noticed Marin looking at her, something complicated passed across her features. Gratitude mixed with fear, mixed with the desperate hope that someone might finally help. Marin gave her an almost imperceptible nod. "Hold on. I see you." The door banged open at exactly 6 a.m., and Bryce Kellerman strode in like a king entering his throne room. His 3 regular companions flanked him in formation, and behind them trailed 2 more cadets Marin had not seen before. The crew was larger than initially assessed. 6 confirmed members now, possibly more. Kellerman's eyes found her immediately, and his smile spread with the satisfaction of a man whose prey had shown up exactly as commanded. "Look at this. Our new friend actually has a brain." He crossed the room in easy strides while his entourage spread out to block casual observation from other angles. "I was worried you might need a reminder about our arrangement." Marin stood slowly, keeping her gaze slightly lowered. "You said 6 a.m. I am here." "That you are." Kellerman circled her once, a predator inspecting its catch. His fingers brushed her shoulder as he passed, a casual violation of personal space designed to establish dominance. "My gear's in my quarters. Building B, room 214. You will retrieve it, bring it to the training facility, and have it arranged before I arrive at 0630. He stopped in front of her, close enough that she could count the individual hairs in his eyebrows. "And you will do this every morning until I decide otherwise." "Understood." Marin nodded. "Understood." One of the cadets behind Kellerman, a stocky redhead with mean eyes, snickered. "She learns fast. Maybe she will last longer than the others." The words landed like ice water. Others, plural. Thomas Yilmaz had not been an isolated incident. He had been part of a pattern, one victim in a sequence that stretched back who knew how long. Kellerman shot the redhead a look that contained warning. "Shut up, Morrison." Morrison's smirk faded, but not before Marin had filed away his name and the implication of his careless words. The crew had done this before. They had a system, a rotation of targets, a methodology refined through repetition. And somewhere, either through willful blindness or active participation, the command structure had allowed it to continue. "What are you waiting for?" Kellerman's voice snapped her back to the moment. "My gear is not going to carry itself." Marin moved toward the door, passing close enough to Destiny Mbeki to brush her arm with deliberate casualness. The contact lasted less than a second, but it carried a message. "You are not alone. Someone is watching." She walked through the early morning air toward Building B, her mind processing the new information. Morrison's slip suggested documentation of previous victims. If Kellerman's crew had been operating long enough to develop inside jokes about survival rates, there would be evidence. Complaints filed and buried. Medical records showing suspicious injuries. Transfer requests from recruits desperate to escape. Building B was a standard barrack structure, 3 floors of identical rooms housing cadets in the advanced training pipeline. Room 214 was on the 2nd floor, corner unit, the kind of premium placement that came with seniority or connections. Marin climbed the stairs and found the door unlocked, exactly as someone with nothing to fear would leave it. The room told a story. Expensive items that did not belong in a cadet's quarters. Photographs showing Bryce Kellerman with his father at various military functions, the colonel's hand always resting on his son's shoulder with proprietary pride. A laptop left open on the desk, screen dark, but not locked. Marin had perhaps 4 minutes before anyone would question her presence. She pulled a device from her pocket no larger than a thumbnail and pressed it against the laptop's USB port. The device would clone the hard drive's contents and transmit them to a secure server within the hour. Whatever Kellerman kept on his personal computer, from messages to photographs to anything he was foolish enough to document, would soon be in her possession. She located his gear bag by the door and shouldered it, leaving the room exactly as she had found it. The walk to the training facility took 7 minutes at a pace that suggested reluctance rather than purpose. She arrived at 0622 and arranged the gear with the careful attention of someone afraid to make mistakes. Kellerman arrived at 0633, flanked by Morrison and another cadet she now recognized from the personnel files as Devin Shrike, son of a Navy captain stationed in San Diego. The connections ran deep and wide, a network of privileged sons protected by their father's ranks. Kellerman inspected his gear with exaggerated scrutiny, searching for any flaw that would justify punishment. Finding none, he made a sound of mild disappointment. Not bad for a first day. He grabbed his bag and turned toward the training facility entrance, then paused. Tomorrow I expect my boots polished as well. Dismissed. Marin watched him disappear inside, counting silently to 30 before allowing herself to breathe normally. The device had worked. Within hours, she would have access to whatever digital footprint Kellerman had been careless enough to create. She turned to head back toward Building 14 and found herself face to face with Morrison, who had doubled back without her noticing. The redhead stood close enough that she could smell energy drink on his breath, his expression carrying something uglier than Kellerman's theatrical cruelty. "You think you're clever," he said quietly. "I saw the way you looked at that Becky girl. Like you're going to protect her or something." His hand shot out and grabbed her wrist, squeezing hard enough to bruise. "Let me tell you how this works. Kellerman picks the targets, and we break them. That is the game. Some break fast, some break slow, but they all break eventually. Thomas thought he could outlast us too." The name hung between them like a confession. Morrison leaned closer. "If I catch you talking to anyone about anything, I will make sure you end up just like him. And unlike Kellerman, I do not play nice." He released her wrist and walked away, leaving Marin standing alone outside the training facility with a bruise forming on her arm and a recording device capturing every word he had just spoken. Morrison had just made a critical error. He had confirmed the connection between Kellerman's crew and Thomas Yilmaz's death, and he had threatened a Navy SEAL with murder. The investigation had just accelerated beyond her initial timeline, because now it was not just about documentation. It was about preventing the next death before Kellerman and his crew could claim another victim, starting with Destiny and Becky. The gymnasium was nearly empty at 2100 hours, which was exactly why Marin had chosen it. She needed space to think, to process the data streaming into her secure tablet from Kellerman's clone hard drive, and to prepare for what she increasingly suspected would become a physical confrontation before this mission concluded. She moved through a series of stretches that appeared routine, but were actually combat preparation sequences designed to prime muscle memory. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as she reviewed the files her device had extracted. The contents of Kellerman's laptop painted a portrait of systematic cruelty documented with disturbing casualness. Group chat messages joking about which recruits cried the fastest. Photographs of hazing rituals that violated every regulation in the Uniform Code of Military Justice. And buried in a folder labeled Homework, a video file dated the night Thomas Yilmaz died. Marin had watched the first 30 seconds before forcing herself to stop. What those men had done to that boy was not hazing. It was torture, and they had recorded it like a trophy. The gymnasium door opened behind her. She did not turn around immediately, using the mirror along the far wall to assess the situation. 6 figures had entered, spreading out in a formation designed to cut off exits. Kellerman stood at the center, Morrison to his right, Shrike to his left, and 3 others she now recognized from the personnel files as Cadet Nathan Foley, Cadet Dmitry Volkov, and Cadet James Chun. The full crew, assembled for what they clearly intended to be a lesson. Kellerman's voice echoed across the empty space. "I hear you have been busy today, talking to people you should not be talking to, asking questions about things that are none of your business." Marin turned slowly, keeping her hands visible and her posture non-threatening. She needed to know how much they knew. "I do not know what you mean." Morrison stepped forward, his face twisted with the particular rage of a bully who suspects his power is being challenged. "You were in Kellerman's room for 6 minutes this morning. That is 4 minutes longer than it takes to grab a gear bag." Kellerman raised a hand, and Morrison stopped. The gesture revealed the hierarchy clearly. Bryce was the leader, but Morrison was the enforcer, the one who did the dirty work when intimidation was not enough. "Here's what I think happened." Kellerman walked toward her with measured steps, each one designed to shrink the distance and amplify the threat. "I think you are not really an administrative transfer. I think someone sent you here to cause problems for me." And I think you need to understand what happens to people who cause problems. The 6 of them formed a semicircle around her now, close enough that she could smell their collective aggression. In her peripheral vision, she tracked their positions, calculated their reach, identified the sequence in which they would need to be neutralized if this escalated. She still had a choice. She could maintain her cover, accept whatever punishment they intended to deliver, and continue gathering evidence through official channels. The mission parameters did not authorize her to reveal her capabilities unless absolutely necessary. Then Morrison pulled something from his pocket, a length of cord, the same type that had been found around Thomas Yilmaz's neck. "I say we give her a preview," he said. "Show her what happens to rats." The choice evaporated. Marin moved. The first strike caught Morrison's wrist before he could register that she had closed the distance. The cord dropped as his hand went numb from the nerve cluster impact. Her elbow found his solar plexus in the same motion, folding him in half with an exhale that sounded like a deflating balloon. Volkov lunged from her left. She redirected his momentum, using his own weight to send him crashing into Chun. Both went down in a tangle of limbs. Shrike came at her with trained precision, a boxer's stance that suggested actual combat experience. She let him throw a jab, slipped inside his guard, and delivered 3 rapid strikes to his floating ribs. Something cracked. He staggered backward, gasping. Foley hesitated, which was the smartest thing any of them had done. Marin used a pause to sweep Morrison's legs as he tried to rise, putting him back on the ground with a thud that echoed through the gymnasium. 4 down in under 8 seconds. Kellerman had not moved. He stood frozen, his face cycling through emotions too quickly to track. Confusion, disbelief, the dawning recognition that he had fundamentally miscalculated. "What the hell are you?" he breathed. Marin straightened, rolling her shoulders to release the tension that combat always generated. Around her, his crew groaned and struggled to process what had just happened. She could have ended all of them permanently. Instead, she had used precisely calibrated force, enough to incapacitate without causing lasting damage. The restraint was deliberate. She stepped toward Kellerman, and for the first time since she had arrived at this base, she let the mask drop completely. Let him see the woman beneath the performance. "My name is Petty Officer First Class Marin Okafor. I have completed 14 deployments to locations that do not appear on any map. I have received training in 17 forms of close-quarters combat, and I have been sent here by Naval Special Warfare Command to investigate the death of Seaman recruit Thomas Yilmaz." Kellerman's face went pale. She continued walking toward him, and he stumbled backward until his shoulders hit the gymnasium wall. "I have recordings of Morrison threatening me. I have the contents of your laptop, including the video from the night Thomas died. And I have witness testimony from people who are no longer willing to stay silent." His mouth opened and closed, but no words emerged. Marin stopped inches from his face. "Your father's rank cannot protect you from what is coming. Naval Criminal Investigative Service is already reviewing the evidence. By tomorrow morning, this entire base will know what you and your crew did to that boy." Behind her, Morrison had managed to get to his knees. He lunged at her back with a roar of pure rage. She sidestepped without looking, caught his arm, and used his momentum to drive him face first into the floor. This time, he did not get up. Kellerman's eyes were wild now, darting between his fallen crew and the woman who had dismantled them like they were children playing at violence. "You do not understand. My father will bury this. He has done it before. You cannot touch us." Marin smiled, and there was nothing warm in it. "I have sent copies of everything to 3 separate oversight agencies, 2 congressional offices, and a journalist who specializes in military accountability. Your father cannot bury what is already above ground." She turned and walked toward the gymnasium exit, leaving 6 broken men in her wake. At the door, she paused without looking back. "Thomas Yilmaz deserved to wear the uniform you have disgraced. His family deserves to know the truth about how he died. And every recruit on this base deserves to serve without fear of predators like you." She pushed through the door into the cool night air. Behind her, She heard Kellerman screaming at his crew to get up, to do something, his voice cracking with the desperation of a man watching his entire world crumble. The investigation was no longer covert, and by morning, everyone would know exactly what kind of monsters have been hiding in plain sight. The knock on Master Chief Vasquez's door came at 06:15 the next morning, 15 minutes before official working hours. Marin had not slept. She had spent the night monitoring communications channels, tracking the ripples her gymnasium confrontation had sent through the base's informal networks, and preparing for the counterattack she knew would come. Vasquez opened the door with dark circles under her eyes that suggested she had not slept either. "Get inside. Now." The office felt different this morning, charged with an electricity that came from knowing everything was about to change. Vasquez closed the door and turned to face Marin with an expression that mixed admiration with genuine fear. Colonel Kellerman landed at O'Hare at 0400. "He is on base right now, in Captain Hendrick's office." She paused, letting the weight of that information settle. Whatever you did last night, it got his attention. Marin had expected a response, but the speed surprised her. A colonel did not abandon his duty station and fly across the country in the middle of the night for a simple hazing complaint. Bryce must have called his father immediately after the gymnasium incident, and whatever he said had triggered a full emergency response. "What is the official story?" Vasquez handed her a printed memo, the kind that circulated through command channels before being conveniently lost. "According to this, you assaulted 6 cadets without provocation during an unprovoked psychotic episode. You are to be detained pending psychiatric evaluation and possible court-martial." She met Marin's eyes. "They're trying to flip the narrative before your evidence reaches anyone who matters." Marin read the memo twice. The language was careful, legalistic, designed to create a paper trail that would justify whatever happened next. Colonel Kellerman had done this before. The machinery of protection was well-oiled and efficient. "The evidence packages I sent last night, have they been confirmed received?" Vasquez nodded. "I got acknowledgement from NCIS and one of the congressional offices. But here's the problem." She pulled up a screen on her computer. "The base communications officer flagged your outgoing transmissions at 0300 this morning. Colonel Kellerman now knows exactly where you sent everything and who received it," which meant the colonel would be working his connections, calling in favors, applying pressure to make those evidence packages disappear before they could be properly reviewed. The man had protected his son for years. He would not stop now just because the stakes had increased. Marin felt the mission shifting beneath her feet. She had planned for resistance, but not for a full mobilization of a colonel's network operating on home territory with advance warning. The window for a clean resolution was closing rapidly. "Where is Destiny and Becky right now?" Vasquez frowned at the apparent change of subject. "Barraxchi y asume." "Why?" "Because Kellerman's crew just lost their primary target." Marin moved toward the door. When predators feel threatened, they lash out at whatever is closest. Destiny has been their secondary focus for weeks. If Bryce wants to prove he still has power, she is the easiest way to do it. The realization hit Vasquez visibly. "I will send security to her barracks." "No." Marin shook her head. "Security reports to Captain Hendricks, who is currently meeting with Colonel Kellerman. Any order you give through official channels will be intercepted or delayed. I need to get to her directly." She was out the door before Vasquez could respond, moving through the early morning corridors at a pace that attracted attention but not interference. The base was waking up around her, recruits stumbling toward morning formation, instructors preparing for another day of training. None of them knew that a war was being fought in the spaces between their routines. Barracks C was a 4-minute walk that Marin covered in 2. She took the stairs 3 at a time, her mind running calculations about who might already be there, what she might be walking into, whether she was already too late. 3rd floor. Room 312 according to the personnel files she had memorized. The door was closed. Marin pressed her ear against it and heard nothing. She knocked twice, sharp and deliberate. "Destiny, it is Petty Officer Okafor." "Open the door." Silence. She knocked again. "Destiny, I know you were scared. I know what has been happening to you. I am here to help, but I need you to open this door right now. A sound from inside. Muffled. Wrong. Marin did not hesitate. She stepped back and drove her boot into the door just below the lock. The frame splintered on the second kick, and she was inside before the door finished swinging open. The room was small, standard recruit quarters with 2 bunks and minimal personalization. Destiny and Becky sat on the floor between the beds, her knees pulled to her chest, her eyes red and swollen from crying. In her hand, she held a bottle of pills. Oh God! Marin dropped to her knees beside the young woman. How many did you take? Destiny, look at me. How many? Destiny's voice came out broken, barely above a whisper. None yet. I was trying to be brave enough. She looked up, and her eyes held the same emptiness that witnesses had described in Thomas Yilmaz's face the night he died. They told me what they did to him. Morrison showed me photographs. He said I was next, that nobody would believe me, that the only way out was the same way Thomas found. The rage that surged through Marin was incandescent, a white-hot fury that demanded immediate and violent release. Morrison had not just threatened this girl. He had systematically broken her down, showed her evidence of murder, and handed her the means to become their next victim. It was not hazing. It was psychological warfare designed to produce corpses. She took the pilled bottle from Destiny's unresisting fingers and set it aside. Then she placed both hands on the young woman's shoulders and spoke with deliberate calm. Listen to me. You are not going to die today. You're not going to give them that victory. What they did to Thomas and what they tried to do to you is going to be exposed to the entire world. But I need you alive to testify. I need you to tell everyone exactly what Morrison said and showed you. Destiny shook her head, tears streaming down her face. You do not understand. The colonel is here. I heard people talking this morning. He's going to make everything go away, just like before. Marin pulled the young woman into an embrace, feeling her shake with sobs that came from somewhere deeper than despair. She held her tight, the way she had held teammates after missions that broke something inside them, the way she wished someone had held Thomas Yilmaz before he ran out of hope. The colonel cannot make me go away. She spoke into Destiny's hair. I have sent evidence to people he cannot reach. By this time tomorrow, there will be investigators on this base who answer to no one in his chain of command. But right now, I need to get you somewhere safe. Where? Destiny pulled back, wiping her eyes. There is nowhere safe on this base. Marin smiled grimly. There is one place they will not dare touch you. She helped Destiny to her feet, steadied her when her knees buckled, and guided her toward the door. Behind them, the pill bottle sat on the floor like a monument to what almost happened. One more victim had almost been claimed. But not today. Today, Marin was going to take the fight directly to Colonel Kellerman, and she was going to make sure he understood exactly what kind of enemy he had made. Master Chief Vasquez's office had transformed into a makeshift safe house. Destiny sat wrapped in a blanket on the small couch, a cup of tea cooling in her hands while Vasquez stood guard at the door. The older woman had not asked questions when Marin arrived with the trembling recruit. She had simply nodded and started making calls. Marin paced the small space, her mind working through tactical options. Colonel Kellerman had resources, connections, and the advantage of operating within a system he had spent decades learning to manipulate. But he also had weaknesses: arrogance, predictability, and a son whose digital footprint contained evidence of murder. The laptop contents, she said to Vasquez. You have seen them. Vasquez's jaw tightened. I watched 30 seconds of that video before I had to stop. What they did to that boy was not hazing. It was torture followed by what I can only describe as intentional psychological destruction. They broke him systematically over the course of 3 hours, and then they told him exactly what would happen if he reported it. Destiny made a small sound from the couch. Marin turned to see the young woman staring at her tea with the hollow expression of someone reliving their own near destruction. They told him no one would believe him, Destiny whispered. Morrison said that to me too. He said Thomas thought someone would help, and look what happened. He said the system belongs to them. The system. Those 2 words crystallized something that had been forming in Marin's mind since she first read Thomas Yilmaz's sanitized death report. This was not just about Bryce Kellerman and his crew. It was not even just about Colonel Kellerman protecting his son. There was infrastructure here, a network of complicity that extended through multiple levels of command. She turned to Vasquez. The complaints that disappeared. The investigation that concluded nothing happened. The security footage that experienced technical difficulties. Who specifically handled each of those failures? Vasquez pulled a file from her desk, the same personnel records she had been compiling for months. Captain Hendricks signed off on the investigation conclusion. Lieutenant Commander Briggs in security authorized the footage deletion. Petty Officer Garrison intercepted the formal complaints before they could be logged. She spread the documents across her desk. I have been tracking this for 2 years, ever since I started noticing patterns. Complaints against certain cadets always disappeared. Certain recruits always transferred suddenly. And every single time, the trail led back to someone with a connection to Colonel Kellerman. The scope was larger than Marin had initially assessed. This was not a colonel protecting his son. This was a colonel who had built a network of loyal subordinates specifically designed to shield a pattern of predatory behavior. How many? Marin asked quietly. How many victims before Thomas? Vasquez closed her eyes. That I can confirm, 7. Recruits who complained and were suddenly transferred to undesirable postings. 1 who was discharged on fabricated mental health grounds. 2 who left the Navy entirely rather than continue fighting a system that refused to hear them. And the ones you cannot confirm. The silence that followed was answer enough. Marin's secure tablet buzzed with an incoming transmission. She checked the encryption protocols before opening it, then felt something cold settle in her stomach. The message was from her commanding officer at Naval Special Warfare Command. It was 2 sentences long. Colonel Kellerman has filed formal charges against you for assault and insubordination. You are ordered to report to base security immediately for detention pending investigation. Vasquez read her expression. What is it? They are moving faster than I anticipated. Marin showed her the message. Kellerman is not just trying to bury the evidence. He's trying to bury me. If you report to security, you will disappear into the system. Vasquez shook her head. Administrative detention can last weeks before formal charges are filed. By then, every piece of evidence will be compromised and every witness will be transferred or intimidated into silence. Destiny looked up from her tea, something fierce breaking through the hollowness in her eyes. Then do not report. It was insubordination. It was career suicide. It violated every protocol Marin had sworn to uphold. It was also the only option that kept the investigation alive. She made her decision in the span of a heartbeat. Master Chief, I need you to do something that could end your career. Vasquez met her gaze without flinching. I have spent 2 years watching predators destroy young people while the system I gave my life to look the other way. Tell me what you need. I need you to get Destiny off this base. Take her to the NCIS field office in Chicago and make sure she gives a formal statement before anyone can intercept her. Her testimony about what Morrison said and showed her is direct evidence of witness intimidation and conspiracy to cover up a death. What about you? Marin moved toward the door. I am going to do something I should have done the moment I arrived. She paused with her hand on the doorknob. I'm going to find Colonel Kellerman and make him understand that his network has a hole in it he never anticipated. Vasquez began gathering Destiny and preparing for departure. At the couch, the young recruit stood on shaking legs, but there was something different in her posture now. Something that looked like the first spark of anger replacing despair. Petty Officer Okafor, Destiny said, when I testify, I want to tell them everything. Not just what Morrison did to me. Everything I saw happen to others that I was too scared to report. Marin nodded. That is exactly what I am counting on. She slipped out of the office and into a base that had become hostile territory. Security patrols will be looking for her within minutes. Colonel Kellerman would have eyes everywhere, loyal subordinates ready to report any sighting. But Marin had operated in environments far more dangerous than a Navy training facility. She had moved through cities where every shadow could hide an enemy, where detection meant death, where the mission required becoming invisible in plain sight. The colonel thought he was hunting a troublesome petty officer who had stumbled onto inconvenient truths. He had no idea he was being hunted by a ghost. Marin moved through the base using maintenance corridors and service entrances, avoiding main thoroughfares and security checkpoints. Her destination was the administrative building where Colonel Kellerman had established his command post. If she could access his communications, she could map his entire network, identify every compromised officer, and transmit the information before anyone could stop her. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parade grounds as she approached from the east, using the angle to minimize her visibility. Through the windows of the administrative building, she could see figures moving on the second floor. One of them wore the eagles of the full colonel. Vernon Kellerman stood with his back to the window, speaking into a phone with the animated gestures of a man issuing orders. Even from this distance, Marin could see the family resemblance to his son. The same entitled posture, the same assumption that the world would bend to accommodate his will. She checked her equipment one final time. Recording devices active. Secure transmission protocols ready. Evidence packages prepared for immediate distribution to every oversight agency she could reach. The colonel had built his network over 20 years. She was about to tear it down in 20 minutes. The service entrance to the administrative building was secured by a keypad that had not been updated since the Clinton administration. Marin bypassed it in under 40 seconds, slipping into a basement corridor that smelled of cleaning supplies and neglected maintenance. Above her, she could hear footsteps and muffled voices, the ordinary sounds of a military bureaucracy that had no idea what was about to happen. She moved through the basement level, mapping the building's layout against the blueprints she had memorized during her mission preparation. The colonel had commandeered a conference room on the second floor, which meant his communications equipment would be operating through the building's main network hub located in a utility closet on the first floor. The hub was unguarded. Why would it be? No one expected a threat from inside the system. Marin connected her device to the network router and initiated a protocol that would mirror all communications passing through the building's secure channels. Every call Colonel Kellerman made, every email he sent, every order he transmitted would now be copied to her secure server. The evidence was no longer just about what had happened to Thomas Yilmaz. It was about documenting the cover-up in real time. She was about to disconnect when voices approached from the stairwell. Two men, speaking in the clipped tones of people discussing something they did not want overheard. The detention order has been distributed to all security posts. First voice, older, authoritative. If she tries to leave the base, she will be stopped at every gate. What if she has already transmitted the evidence? Second voice, younger, nervous. The congressional offices she contacted have staff who actually read their mail. The colonel is handling that. A pause, footsteps stopping just outside the utility closet. Senator Morrison owes him from the procurement committee situation. The inquiry will be delayed until the evidence can be properly contextualized. Marin held perfectly still, controlling her breathing to near silence. Through the gap beneath the door, she could see two pairs of shoes. Dress shoes, officer quality. These were not enlisted security personnel. These were members of Kellerman's network, discussing the mechanics of obstruction as casually as they might discuss lunch plans. What about the girl? The nervous voice again. Becky, if she talks before we can transfer her, she will not talk. The older voice carried cold certainty. Morrison paid her a visit this morning before the situation escalated. Showed her what happened to the last recruit who thought about causing problems. That girl is not going to say a word to anyone. The footsteps resumed, moving away down the corridor. Marin waited a full 60 seconds before exhaling. Morrison had gotten to Destiny before she did. The photographs, the threats, the systematic destruction of hope. It had been a preemptive strike designed to neutralize a potential witness before she even knew she was one. These people did not just react to threats. They anticipated and eliminated them. But they had not anticipated Marin. She completed the network connection and moved toward the stairwell, ascending to the second floor with the silent precision that had earned her the call sign Ghost. The conference room where Colonel Kellerman had established his command post, was at the end of a long corridor lined with administrative offices. Through the frosted glass of the door, she could see multiple figures seated around a table. A frontal approach was impossible. Too many witnesses, too many variables. She needed another angle. The building's ventilation system ran through ceiling panels that had been installed during a renovation 15 years ago. The panels were designed to support maintenance workers, which meant they could support her weight if she distributed it correctly. Marin found an unoccupied office 3 doors down from the conference room, slipped inside, and climbed onto the desk. The ceiling panel lifted easily, revealing a crawl space filled with dust and cable conduits. She pulled herself up and began moving toward her target. The voices grew clearer as she approached the conference room's position. Colonel Kellerman's baritone cut through the ambient noise. The situation is contained. My son made an error in judgment by confronting the woman directly, but we can work with that. Her assault on 6 cadets gives us grounds for detention and psychiatric evaluation. Another voice, one Marin did not recognize. What about the video from the Yilmaz incident? If that reaches the wrong hands, it will not. Kellerman's confidence was absolute. I have already spoken with Admiral Chun. He understands that certain investigations need to be handled with discretion. The video will be classified as evidence in an ongoing security matter and sealed accordingly. Marin positioned herself directly above the conference room, finding a gap in the ceiling panels that gave her a partial view of the table below. Colonel Vernon Kellerman sat at the head, his eagles gleaming under fluorescent lights. To his left sat Captain Hendricks, the base commander who had dismissed Vasquez's concerns. To his right, a man in civilian clothes who carried himself with the particular arrogance of someone with political connections. 6 other officers filled the remaining seats, each one representing a node in the network that had protected Bryce Kellerman's predatory behavior for years. Marin activated her recording device and began documenting everything. The civilian spoke next. The congressional inquiry can be delayed, but not indefinitely. Senator Morrison is facing a primary challenge and cannot afford to appear soft on military accountability. We need this resolved within 72 hours. It will be. Kellerman leaned forward. The woman will be in custody by end of day. Once she is detained, we control the narrative. She becomes a disgruntled sailor who fabricated evidence to cover her own violent tendencies. Her sealed background works in our favor. We can claim combat stress, psychological instability, vendetta against authority figures. The casual efficiency of it made Marin's stomach turn. They were discussing the destruction of her career and credibility with the same detachment they might use to plan a training exercise. And somewhere in this same building, their sons and protégés were learning that power meant never facing consequences. What about Vasquez? Captain Hendricks looked uncomfortable for the first time. She has been compiling documentation for months. If she decides to go public, Vasquez is a Master Chief with 30 years of service and no political connections. Kellerman dismissed the concern with a wave of his hand. Her word against a colonel, a captain, and 6 decorated officers. Who do you think the system will believe? He was right. That was the worst part. In any normal circumstance, the system would believe him. The ranks, the connections, the carefully constructed narrative. All of it would combine to crush anyone who stood against them. But this was not a normal circumstance. Marin had transmitted everything she recorded directly to 3 separate servers, each one controlled by organizations that operated outside Colonel Kellerman's reach. NCIS Chicago, where Vasquez was taking destiny at this very moment. The Navy Inspector General's office, which had jurisdiction over flag officer misconduct. And a journalist named Sarah Chun who had built her career exposing exactly this kind of institutional corruption. The colonel thought he was containing the situation. He had no idea the walls were already burning. Marin began her retreat through the ceiling, moving back toward the empty office where she had entered. She had what she needed. Recordings of a colonel and his network explicitly discussing evidence suppression, witness intimidation, and abuse of authority. Now she just had to survive long enough to make sure it mattered. She dropped back into the empty office and froze. Bryce Kellerman stood in the doorway, his face a mask of hatred, a security baton in his hand. I knew you would try something like this. His voice was barely controlled. I told my father you were too dangerous to leave running around. You should have listened. Behind him, Morrison appeared with two other members of the crew. All of them carried makeshift weapons. The door to the office clicked shut, and Marin realized that the final confrontation had come sooner than she planned. The office was 12 feet by 10 feet, standard government dimensions, with a metal desk, 2 chairs, and a window that looked out onto the parade grounds 2 stories below. Marin calculated angles and distances while keeping her expression neutral. For opponents, confined space, multiple weapons. Survivable, but not without risk. Bryce stepped further into the room, his confidence bolstered by numbers and the baton he was slapping against his palm. You embarrassed me in front of my crew. You threatened my family. And now you are skulking around like a rat while my father cleans up your mess. Morrison flanked to the left, positioning himself to cut off access to the window. The other two, Shrike and Volkov, spread right to block the door completely. They had learned from the gymnasium. This time, they were not going to let her control the engagement. Your father is in a conference room 3 doors down. Marin kept her voice conversational, along with Captain Hendricks and about 6 other officers who are all currently being recorded discussing how to cover up Thomas Yilmaz's murder. The word landed like a grenade. Murder. Not hazing. Not suicide. Murder. Bryce's face contorted. He killed himself. That had nothing to do with us. You tortured him for 3 hours and then told him exactly what would happen if he reported it. Marin held his gaze without blinking. I have the video, Bryce. The one you were stupid enough to keep on your laptop. I have seen what you did to that boy. And by tomorrow morning, so will everyone else. Something shifted in Bryce's expression. The arrogance cracked, revealing something uglier underneath. Fear mixed with the desperate rage of a cornered animal. Morrison moved first, lunging with a speed that suggested he had been waiting for any excuse. Marin sidestepped, caught his extended arm, and used his momentum to drive him face first into the metal desk. The impact rang through the small room like a bell. Volkov came next, swinging a length of pipe he had concealed along his leg. Marin ducked under the arc, drove her elbow into his kidney, and followed with a knee to his thigh that dropped him to the floor. Shrike hesitated, remembering the cracked ribs from their last encounter. That hesitation cost him. Marin closed the distance before he could set his stance, delivered a palm strike to his sternum that stole his breath, and swept his legs out from under him. 3 down in 6 seconds. Faster than the gymnasium because the space was smaller and desperation made people predictable. Bryce had not moved. He stood frozen with his baton raised, watching his crew crumble with the expression of someone whose worldview was collapsing in real time. You still do not understand, do you? Marin stepped over Morrison's groaning form. You spent your whole life believing your father's rank made you untouchable. You thought you could hurt people and never face consequences. But the thing about systems built on protection is that they only work until someone comes along who exists outside the system. She was close enough now to see the sweat beading on his forehead, to smell the fear beneath his expensive cologne. I am that someone, Bryce. I have operated in places where your father's eagles mean nothing. I have faced enemies who would consider you a minor inconvenience. And I have spent every moment since I arrived on this base building a case that your entire network cannot contain. The baton trembled in his grip. My father will destroy you. Your father is about to have much bigger problems than me. As if on cue, the sound of multiple vehicles screeching to a halt filtered through the window. Marin glanced outside and felt something close to satisfaction settle in her chest. 3 black SUVs had pulled up to the administrative building's main entrance. Men and women in civilian clothes with federal credentials visible were already moving toward the doors. Naval Criminal Investigative Service did not announce their arrival, which meant this was not a courtesy visit. Vasquez had gotten through. The evidence had reached people who could act on it, and someone with authority had decided that Colonel Kellerman's network was no longer going to be allowed to police itself. Bryce saw the vehicles too. His face went pale. That is not possible. My father said the inquiry was delayed. Your father lied to himself. Marin took the baton from his unresisting fingers. He has been lying to himself for so long, he forgot that reality eventually catches up. The door to the office burst open, and two NCIS agents swept in with weapons drawn. They took in the scene with professional efficiency. 3 men on the ground, one standing frozen, and a woman who looked remarkably calm for someone who had just been in a fight. Petty Officer Okafor, the lead agent, a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes, lowered her weapon slightly. We received your transmissions. All of them, including the recording from the conference room. Including that. The agent's expression was grim. Colonel Kellerman and his associates are being detained as we speak. She looked at Bryce with undisguised contempt. This one too. Bryce finally found his voice. You cannot do this. My father is a colonel. He has connections at the Pentagon. Senator Morrison will. Senator Morrison is currently being interviewed by the FBI regarding his involvement in obstruction of justice. The agent gestured to her partner, who moved forward with handcuffs. Your father's connections are not going to help him this time. Marin watched as Bryce Kellerman was restrained and led from the room. The young man who had grabbed her arm 2 days ago, who had promised to break her, who had believed his birthright protected him from consequence, looked suddenly very small. Morrison and the others were collected next, their injuries documented, but deemed non-life-threatening. Shrike had to be helped to his feet, still struggling to breathe from the sternum strike. When the room was finally empty, except for Marin and the lead agent, the woman turned to her with an expression that mixed respect with something like awe. 14 deployments, 17 forms of combat training, and a classified service record that I am not even authorized to fully access. She shook her head. They really did grab the wrong girl. Marin allowed herself a small smile. How is Destiny and Becky? Safe. Gave her statement an hour ago. The agent's expression softened. She wanted me to tell you something. She said to say thank you for seeing her when no one else would. The words hit harder than any blow Marin had absorbed in the last 2 days. Thomas Yilmaz had needed someone to see him too. Someone who would believe him, protect him, fight for him when the system failed. He had died because that someone never came. Destiny would live because this time someone did. But the mission was not over yet. Is the colonel still in the building? The agent nodded. Conference room. Being very cooperative now that he realizes the scope of what we have. She paused. He is asking to speak with you. Marin moved toward the door. Some conversations needed to happen face to face. The conference room looked different now. The officers who had filled the seats were gone, replaced by NCIS agents cataloging documents and securing electronic devices. Colonel Vernon Kellerman sat alone at the head of the table, his eagles still gleaming, but his posture diminished in a way that rank could not disguise. He looked up when Marin entered, and she saw something in his eyes she had not expected. Not anger, not defiance, exhaustion. The bone-deep weariness of a man who had spent 20 years building walls that had just come crashing down. Petty Officer Okafor. His voice was hoarse. Or should I use your operational designation? I understand Ghost is quite respected in certain circles. Marin remained standing. She wanted the height advantage, the psychological pressure of looking down at a man who had spent his career looking down at others. You wanted to speak with me. Kellerman gestured to the empty chairs. Please, what I have to say will take more than a moment. She did not sit. I am listening. A long breath escaped him. My son is not a monster. He paused, seeming to recognize how hollow the word sounded. That is what I told myself for years. Every complaint that crossed my desk, every whisper that reached my ears, I told myself it was exaggeration. Hazing culture, boys being boys, the kind of thing that builds character and weeds out the weak. Marin felt her jaw tighten. Thomas Yilmaz was not weak. No, Kellerman's voice cracked on the word. He was not. I watched the video this morning, the one from my son's laptop. He looked down at his hands, and Marin saw they were trembling. I watched what Bryce and his friends did to that young man, and I realized that I have spent 2 decades protecting something I did not understand. The admission hung in the air between them. Marin had interrogated men who committed atrocities in the name of ideology, religion, or simple greed. She had learned to recognize the difference between genuine remorse and strategic performance. What she saw in Colonel Kellerman's face was something more complicated than either. "Why did you want to speak with me?" Kellerman reached into his jacket pocket, and the NCIS agent by the door tensed. He moved slowly, deliberately, withdrawing a folded piece of paper that he placed on the table. "This is a list of names. Every officer who was part of my network. Every complaint that was buried. Every recruit who was transferred or discharged to maintain silence." He pushed the paper toward her. "I compiled it this morning while waiting for the inevitable." Marin did not touch it. "Why would you give this to me?" "Because you were right." His eyes met hers, and she saw something breaking behind them. "About all of it. The system I built was designed to protect my son, but somewhere along the way it became something else. A machine that consumed young people who had done nothing wrong except believe the Navy would keep them safe." He stood slowly, and for the first time Marin saw him as something other than an enemy. She saw a father who had loved his son so blindly that he had become complicit in destruction. A career officer who had perverted every principle he had sworn to uphold. A man who was only now beginning to understand the full weight of what he had done. Thomas Yilmaz's parents deserved to know the truth about how their son died. Kellerman's voice was barely above a whisper. They deserved to know that it was not his fault, that he did everything right, reported through proper channels, trusted the system. And the system failed him because I made it fail. Marin picked up the paper and unfolded it. The list was extensive, names and dates, and incidents stretching back nearly 15 years. It was a roadmap of institutional corruption, documented in the handwriting of the man who had architected it. "This does not excuse what you did." "I know." Kellerman straightened his uniform in the reflexive gesture of a career officer. "Nothing excuses it, but perhaps it can help prevent it from happening again." He met her eyes one final time. "You asked me why I wanted to speak with you. It is because you're the first person in 20 years who looked at my son and saw what he really was. Not a colonel's heir, not a promising young leader, a predator. And you did not look away." The door opened behind Marin, and the NCIS lead agent entered. "Colonel Kellerman, we are ready to transport you to the regional detention facility." Kellerman nodded, extending his wrists for the handcuffs with a dignity that seemed almost rehearsed. As the agent secured him, he looked at Marin one last time. "Tell the Yilmaz family I am sorry." He swallowed hard. Tell them their son was brave. Then he was gone, escorted out of the building he had controlled for years, past the subordinates who had enabled his corruption, into a future that held nothing but accountability. Marin stood alone in the conference room, holding a list of names that represented years of suffering. 7 confirmed victims, Vasquez had said, but this list suggested many more. Recruits who had been broken and discarded, their complaints buried, their careers destroyed, their trust in the institution shattered. She thought about Thomas Yilmaz, 20 years old, hanging in a supply closet because he believed no one would help him. She thought about Destiny Mbeki, holding a bottle of pills, convinced that death was the only escape. She thought about all the others whose names she did not yet know, scattered across duty stations and civilian jobs, and perhaps graves, carrying wounds that would never fully heal. The system had failed them. But today, the system had also been forced to confront its failure. Marin folded the list and placed it in her pocket. There would be investigations, hearings, courts-martial. There would be officers who claimed ignorance and others who pointed fingers. The network Colonel Kellerman had built would not dismantle itself quietly, but it would dismantle. She walked out of the conference room and into a corridor filled with controlled chaos. Agents moved with purpose, carrying boxes of evidence and escorting detained personnel. At the far end of the hallway, she saw Captain Hendricks being led away in handcuffs, his face a mask of disbelief. Petty Officer Okafor. She turned to find Cadet Reeves standing against the wall, looking shell-shocked but somehow lighter than he had 2 days ago. He approached her with hesitant steps. "I gave my statement. Everything I saw, everything I should have reported months ago." He swallowed. They said it will help build the case. It will. Reeves nodded, then seemed to struggle with something. I keep thinking about Thomas, about how I saw him that night and did nothing, how I told myself it was not my business. He met her eyes. I did not know how to live with that. Marin considered the young man in front of her. He was not innocent. His silence had contributed to the culture that killed Thomas Yilmaz. But he was also not beyond redemption. You live with it by making sure it matters. She placed a hand on his shoulder. You testified. You broke ranks when it counted. That does not erase what happened, but it helps prevent what could happen next. Reeves absorbed her words, and something in his expression shifted, hardened into resolve. I want to do more. Whatever investigations come next, whatever testimony is needed. I want to help. Marin nodded. Then stay available. This is just the beginning. She left him standing in the corridor and walked toward the building's exit. Outside, the base continued its routines, recruits marching in formation, instructors calling cadence, the machinery of military training grinding forward as it always had. But something had changed. The predators who had hidden within that machinery were being dragged into the light. And Marin Okafor, the quiet administrative transfer who had been grabbed by the wrong cadets on her first day, was just getting started. The news broke at 1800 hours, leading every major network with footage of Colonel Vernon Kellerman being escorted from Naval Station Great Lakes in handcuffs. The cheer-in screamed words like scandal and cover-up and military justice, while talking heads debated what the arrests meant for accountability in the armed forces. Marin watched from the common room of Building 14, surrounded by recruits and cadets who had gathered around the television in stunned silence. Many of them had witnessed Kellerman's crew operating with impunity for months or years. They had seen friends targeted, had heard whispers about what happened to those who complained, had learned to keep their heads down and survive. Now, they were watching the architecture of their fear collapse in real time. A young seaman recruit near the back of the room started crying quietly. Her friend put an arm around her shoulders. Near the front, two cadets who had always walked a careful distance from Kellerman's crew exchanged looks of profound relief. The television cut to a press conference where a Navy admiral in dress whites stood behind a podium bristling with microphones. His face was grave, his words carefully chosen. The behavior alleged in these charges represents a fundamental betrayal of everything our Navy stands for. We have zero tolerance for hazing, abuse, or any conduct that endangers the sailors entrusted to our care. Those responsible will be held fully accountable, regardless of rank or connection. Someone in the common room muttered something skeptical. The admiral continued, I want to speak directly to any service member who has experienced or witnessed misconduct and felt unable to report it. Your voice matters. Your safety matters. And we are committed to building systems worthy of your trust. The press conference cut to questions, but Marin had stopped listening. She had heard promises like this before, after other scandals, other investigations. The words were easy. The follow-through was what mattered. Her secure tablet buzzed with an incoming message. She stepped out of the common room and into the corridor to read it. The message was from Lieutenant Commander Adrian Reese, her actual commanding officer at Naval Special Warfare Command. It was brief and direct. Outstanding work. Return to Coronado for debrief when local situation stabilizes. The Yilmaz family has been notified of developments and wishes to speak with you, if willing. Marin read the last sentence twice. The Yilmaz family. Parents who had buried their son believing he had taken his own life due to personal struggles unrelated to his service. Parents who had been lied to by the institution their child had trusted. She typed a response. I am willing. The corridor was quiet, most of the base's population either watching the news coverage or being interviewed by the expanding NCIS team. Marin walked toward the exit, processing the weight of the last 48 hours. Petty Officer Okafor. She turned to find Master Chief Vasquez approaching from the administrative section. The older woman looked exhausted, but somehow younger than she had 2 days ago, as if a burden she had carried for years had finally been lifted. I just finished my third interview with NCIS. Vasquez fell in a step beside her. They are very interested in the documentation I have been compiling. Apparently, my paranoid record-keeping is going to be useful after all. It was never paranoid. Marin pushed through the exit doors into the evening air. It was the only sane response to an insane situation. They walked in silence for a moment, past the parade grounds where evening colors had just concluded, past the barracks where young sailors were trying to make sense of a world that had shifted beneath their feet. Vasquez spoke quietly. I spoke with Destiny an hour ago. She's doing better. Still fragile, but better. She asked about you. She's going to need support. Long term. NCIS is connecting her with victim advocacy services. And her family is flying in tomorrow. Vasquez paused. She told me something interesting. She said that when you found her in that room, holding those pills, she had already decided to take them. She was just working up the courage. Marin said nothing. She said your voice was the first thing that made her think maybe there was another way, that someone actually saw her. Vasquez's voice thickened. That is not nothing, petty officer. In fact, that is everything. They reached a bench overlooking the lake that gave the station its name. The water was dark now, reflecting the first stars of evening. Marin sat down, and after a moment, Vasquez joined her. How many? Marin asked. The list Colonel Kellerman gave me suggests more victims than we initially identified. How many people do you think were hurt by this network over the years? Vasquez was quiet for a long moment. I have been here for 6 years. In that time, I personally identified 7 likely victims. But the list you showed me goes back 15 years and includes incidents at 3 different duty stations where Kellerman served. She shook her head. Dozens at minimum, possibly more. Dozens of young people who had joined the military believing they would be protected. Dozens of families who had received sanitized explanations for their children's suffering. Dozens of careers ended, lives derailed, trust betrayed. And at the center of it all, a father who loved his son too much to see what he had become. The investigation is going to take months. Marin watched the stars multiply overhead. Courts-martial, congressional hearings, policy reviews. The system is going to examine itself and promise to do better. You sound skeptical. I have seen this before. After Tailhook, after Aberdeen, after every scandal that briefly captures public attention. Marin turned to face Vasquez. The system promises reform, implements new procedures, and then slowly returns to protecting its own. The only thing that creates real change is people like you who refuse to look away. Vasquez absorbed the words. Is that why you do this? The missions, the investigations, the work that puts you in rooms with predators and protectors. Marin considered the question. On the surface, her answer was simple. Orders, duty, the mission parameters assigned by her command. But beneath that surface lay something more personal. I had a brother. She had not spoken these words aloud in years. He joined the army at 18, full of idealism and purpose. 3 months into his first deployment, he reported his squad leader for stealing from Iraqi civilians. A week later, he was dead. Friendly fire, according to the official report. Vasquez drew a sharp breath. I was 16. I did not understand what had really happened until years later when I started digging into the records. The squad leader had connections. The investigation was perfunctory. My brother's death was ruled accidental, and everyone moved on. Except you. Except me. Marin watched a satellite trace across the darkness. I joined the Navy the day I turned 18. I pushed through BUD/S because I needed to become someone the system could not ignore. And I volunteered for investigations like this one because I know what happens when good people trust institutions that do not deserve their trust. The silence between them was comfortable now. 2 women who had spent years fighting battles that most people would never know about. Your brother would be proud of you. Marin felt something shift in her chest. Maybe, or maybe he would tell me that saving one destiny does not balance against all the ones we could not save. Vasquez shook her head. That is not how it works. You do not balance lives against each other like ledger entries. You save the ones you can save, and you honor the ones you could not by making sure their deaths mean something. Marin thought about Thomas Yilmaz, whose death had set this entire investigation in motion. About her brother, whose murder had set her on a path that led to this bench on this evening. About Destiny Becky, who is alive right now because 2 days ago, A stranger had told her to go to Barracks C. Maybe Vasquez was right. Maybe the only way forward was to keep saving the ones who could still be saved. 3 days later, Marin stood in the lobby of a modest hotel in Minneapolis, waiting for a meeting she had been dreading since the moment she agreed to it. The Yilmaz family had traveled from their home in suburban St. Paul to meet the woman who had uncovered the truth about their son's death. They had asked for privacy, requested that no officials or victim advocates be present. Just them and the person who had finally listened when no one else would. Marin had faced insurgents in collapsing buildings. She had conducted interrogations in rooms where the wrong word meant death. She had operated alone behind enemy lines for weeks at a time with no support and no extraction plan. None of it had prepared her for this. The elevator doors opened and a couple in their late 50s stepped out. Elif Yilmaz was small, with dark hair, streaked gray, and eyes that held a grief so profound it seemed to have reshaped her features. Kemal Yilmaz stood beside her, a broad man with calloused hands and the bearing of someone who had worked hard his entire life. Between them, they carried the weight of a loss that no parent should ever have to bear. Petty Officer Okafor. Elif's voice was soft, accented with the rhythms of her Turkish heritage. "Thank you for agreeing to see us." Marin shook their hands, feeling the roughness of labor in Kemal's grip and the tremor of emotion in Elif's. "Thank you for coming. I know this is not easy." They found a quiet corner of the hotel restaurant, empty in the mid-afternoon lull between lunch and dinner. A server brought coffee that no one touched. For a long moment, they simply sat with the enormity of what had brought them together. Kemal spoke first, his English careful and precise. "The Navy told us our son killed himself because he was weak. They said he could not handle the pressure of training. They suggested he had mental health issues we had failed to address." The words came out flat, rehearsed, as if he had repeated them so many times they had lost their ability to wound him further. Elif reached across the table and gripped her husband's hand. "We knew Thomas. He was not weak. He was the strongest person we ever knew. When he was 12, he worked 2 paper routes to help pay for his grandmother's medicine. When he was 16, he stood up to boys twice his size who were bullying a disabled classmate." She paused, her eyes glistening. "Our son did not break because training was hard. Something else happened to him. You were right." Marin kept her voice steady, though something inside her was cracking. "Your son was targeted by a group of cadets who had been abusing recruits for years. They subjected him to systematic harassment and physical abuse that escalated over 3 months. When he reported it through official channels, his complaints were buried by officers who were protecting the perpetrators." Kemal's jaw tightened. "The colonel's son." "Yes, and others." Marin pulled a folder from her bag and placed it on the table. "This contains a summary of the evidence we gathered. I want you to understand that Thomas did everything right. He followed procedures. He trusted the system. The failure was not his." Elif opened the folder with trembling hands. She scanned the first page, then the second. Tears began streaming down her face, but she did not look away. She read every word as if absorbing her son's final testimony. Kemal watched his wife, then turned to Marin. "The video. We were told there is a video of what they did to him." "There is." Marin held his gaze. "I have seen it. I would strongly recommend that you do not." A long silence stretched between them. "Tell us." Elif closed the folder and looked up. "Not everything. Just enough so we understand what our son endured." Marin had prepared for this request. She had consulted with victim advocates about how much information to share, how to honor the parents' need for truth without causing additional trauma. There was no perfect answer. Thomas was brought to a barracks room on the night of his death. There were 6 of them and 1 of him. They spent approximately 3 hours subjecting him to physical and psychological abuse. She paused, giving them time to absorb each piece. At the end, they told him exactly what would happen if he reported the incident. They told him that no one would believe him, that his career would be destroyed, and that they would make his life unbearable for as long as he remained in the Navy. Elif made a sound that was not quite a sob. When Thomas left that room, he had been broken in ways that are difficult to describe. Marin's voice remained steady, though it cost her. He went to a supply closet, and he made a choice that he should never have been forced to make. But I want you to understand something. Your son did not die because he was weak. He died because he was systematically destroyed by people who knew exactly what they were doing, protected by a system that had been corrupted from the top down. Kemal's hands had curled into fists on the table. These men, the ones who did this, what will happen to them? They are facing courts-martial on charges including assault, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and conduct unbecoming. The colonel and several officers are facing additional charges for their role in covering up multiple incidents over many years. Marin met his eyes. They will be held accountable. I give you my word. Elif reached across the table and took Marin's hand. Her grip was stronger than her fragile appearance suggested. You did this. You found the truth when everyone else looked away. I was doing my job. No. Elif shook her head. You were doing what was right. There's a difference. She squeezed Marin's hand tighter. Thomas used to talk about the kind of sailor he wanted to be. He wanted to be someone who stood up for people who could not stand up for themselves. He wanted to be someone who told the truth, even when it was hard. She paused, fresh tears falling. He would have wanted to be like you. The words hit Marin with unexpected force. She thought about her brother, about the idealism that had gotten him killed, about all the young people who joined the military believing in something larger than themselves, only to discover that the institution they trusted could also betray them. Your son was already that person. Marin's voice was thick. He reported what was happening to him because he believed it was wrong. He trusted that someone would listen. The fact that no one did is not a reflection of who he was. It is a reflection of a system that failed him. Kemal stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. For a moment, Marin thought he was going to leave. Instead, he walked around the table and pulled her into an embrace that carried the weight of a father's grief and gratitude combined. Thank you, he said into her shoulder. Thank you for giving us back our son. Elif joined them, and for a long moment the three of them stood in the empty restaurant, connected by loss and truth, and the fragile hope that justice might still mean something. When they finally separated, Elif wiped her eyes and managed something close to a smile. Will you come to Minnesota? When this is over, when the trials are finished, we would like you to visit Thomas's grave, to meet the rest of our family, to know the boy you fought for. Marin nodded. I will be honored. They exchanged contact information and promises to stay in touch. As the Yilmaz family walked toward the elevator, Elif turned back one final time. Petty Officer Okafor. In Turkish, we have a word. Adalet. It means justice, but also righteousness. The belief that wrong will be made right. She placed her hand over her heart. You have given us Adalet. We will not forget. The elevator doors closed, and Marin was alone. She stood in the empty lobby for a long time, letting the weight of the conversation settle into her bones. Thomas Yilmaz had deserved better. So had her brother. So had every young person who had been chewed up by systems that were supposed to protect them. But today, at least, one family had received the truth. And that was worth fighting for. 6 months later, Marin stood at the back of a crowded courtroom in San Diego, watching the final act of a drama that had begun with a hand grabbing her arm in a corridor at Naval Station Great Lakes. Bryce Kellerman sat at the defense table in his dress whites, stripped of rank insignia, his face carrying the hollow look of a man who had finally been forced to confront the consequences of his actions. His attorney had attempted every possible defense, from diminished capacity to undue command influence to claims that the evidence had been obtained improperly. None of it had worked. The military judge, a stern captain with 30 years of service, read the verdict in a voice that carried to every corner of the room. On the charge of assault, guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit assault, guilty. On the charge of conduct unbecoming, guilty. On the charge of obstruction of justice, guilty. Each word landed like a hammer blow. In the gallery, Marin saw Elif and Kemal Yilmaz holding hands, their faces wet with tears that mixed grief and relief in equal measure. Beside them sat Destiny Mbeki, healthy now, her eyes clear, wearing the uniform of a seaman apprentice who had refused to let her abusers define her future. The judge continued. Bryce Allen Kellerman, You are hereby sentenced to 12 years confinement, dishonorable discharge from the United States Navy, forfeiture of all pay and allowances, and reduction to the grade of E1. Bryce's mother, seated in the front row, let out a sound that might have been a sob. His father was not present. Colonel Vernon Kellerman had received his own sentence 3 months earlier, 15 years for his role in the conspiracy, his eagles stripped in a ceremony that had made national news. Morrison had received 10 years. Shrike 8. The others had accepted plea deals that would keep them incarcerated for the better part of a decade. Captain Hendricks had been dishonorably discharged and faced civilian charges for his role in obstructing federal investigations. The network that had taken 20 years to build had been dismantled in less than 6 months. As the courtroom began to empty, Destiny made her way through the crowd to where Marin stood. The young woman had grown in ways that went beyond the physical. There was a steadiness in her bearing now, a quiet strength that had emerged from the ashes of her darkest moment. I wanted to thank you again. Destiny's voice was calm, certain. I know I have said it before, but I do not think I can ever say it enough. You do not need to thank me. Marin placed a hand on her shoulder. You saved yourself. I just showed up at the right moment. Destiny shook her head. You showed up at the only moment. 1 minute later, and I would have swallowed those pills. 1 minute. She paused, letting the weight of that timeline settle between them. I think about that every day. Not with fear anymore, but with gratitude. I got a second chance because someone saw me. What will you do now? Destiny smiled, and it reached her eyes in a way that had seemed impossible 6 months ago. I requested assignment to the Victim Advocacy Program. They approved it last week. I want to be the person who shows up for someone else. Marin felt something warm spread through her chest. The cycle of destruction could become a cycle of protection. Pain could be transformed into purpose. It was not redemption exactly, but it was something close to hope. The Yilmaz family approached next. Elif embracing Marin with the familiarity of someone who had become more than an acquaintance over the past months. They had kept their promise to stay in touch, trading emails and phone calls that had gradually evolved from formal updates to genuine connection. It is finished. Kemal's voice was rough with emotion. Our son can rest now. Marin nodded. He can. Elif pulled back and studied Marin's face with maternal intensity. And you, will you rest now? The question carried more weight than its simple words suggested. Elif had learned about Marin's brother during their correspondence, had understood that the fire driving her investigations burned from personal loss as much as professional duty. There is always another mission. Marin smiled slightly. But I'm taking some leave first, visiting my parents in Oakland. Maybe learning how to be a person who is not constantly hunting predators. That sounds healthy. Elif patted her cheek. You deserve peace, Marin. You have earned it. They parted with promises to visit soon. To attend the memorial service, the Yilmaz family was planning for the 1-year anniversary of Thomas's death. It would not be a funeral this time. It would be a celebration of who he had been and what his death had ultimately accomplished. Marin walked out of the courthouse into California's sunshine, feeling the warmth on her face like a benediction. Her phone buzzed with a message from Lieutenant Commander Reese. New assignment when you are ready. Nodrus, you have earned whatever time you need. She pocketed the phone without responding. There would be time for new missions later. Right now, she wanted to stand in the sunlight and remember why she did this work. Thomas Yilmaz, her brother Marcus, Destiny Mbeki, all the unnamed victims whose files she had read over the years, whose stories had blurred together into a tapestry of institutional failure and human resilience. She could not save them all. No one could, but she could save the ones who crossed her path, could shine light into corners where predators hid, could force systems to confront their failures even when they desperately wanted to look away. A voice interrupted her thoughts. Petty Officer Okafor. She turned to find Master Chief Vasquez approaching from the courthouse steps. The older woman had testified at multiple trials over the past months, her meticulous documentation proving essential to the prosecutions. She looked tired but satisfied, like someone who had finally completed a task they had been working on for years. I wanted to catch you before you disappeared. Vasquez fell in a step beside her as they walked toward the parking lot. The Navy Inspector General's office called this morning. They are implementing new reporting protocols based on recommendations from the investigation. Anonymous hotlines, independent review boards, mandatory documentation that cannot be buried by local commands. It is a start. It is more than that. Vasquez stopped walking and turned to face her. For 20 years, I watched the system fail. I documented everything because I did not know what else to do. But documentation without action is just elaborate record-keeping. She placed a hand on Marin's arm. You turned my records into action. You gave all those pages meaning. Marin thought about the files she had read, the testimony she had gathered, the networks she had mapped. None of it would have mattered without people like Vasquez who had refused to stop bearing witness, even when no one seemed to be listening. We did it together. Vasquez nodded, then surprised Marin by pulling her into a brief, fierce hug. Take care of yourself, Ghost. The Navy needs people like you, but not at the cost of your own soul. They parted ways in the parking lot. Vasquez heading back to Great Lakes, where she had been promoted to Command Master Chief of the entire training command. Marin heading toward an uncertain future that felt, for the first time in years, like it might include something other than hunting. She climbed into her rental car and sat for a moment, hands on the wheel, thinking about everything that had led to this point. A hand grabbing her arm in a corridor. A young man dead in a supply closet. A father's corrupted love. A network of complicity spanning decades. And at the center of it all, a question that had driven her since she was 16 years old. What happens when the people sworn to protect become the ones who destroy? The answer, she had learned, was that someone had to stand up. Someone had to refuse to look away. Someone had to be willing to walk in a hostile territory and shine a light that could not be extinguished. If this story moved you, share your thoughts about your favorite moment or character, or tell us about someone you know who showed hidden strength. Marin started the car and pulled out of the parking lot, leaving the courthouse behind. The predators had been exposed. The victims had been honored. The system had been forced to change. And somewhere out there, a young sailor was reporting for duty, trusting that the institution they had joined would keep them safe. Because of what happened at Great Lakes, that trust was a little more deserved today than it had been 6 months ago. That was not everything, but it was enough.